Welcome, everybody. This is going to be our MRS22 Spring 2021 Transformation of Functions Quiz Number 1 Review, Part 1. Please make sure you watch over these notes to see how we're going to be doing questions on the quiz, covering these questions, these types of questions now. So in this Part 1, we'd have two examples of what we're looking for at the first question. And number 1 begins with f of x equals absolute value of x. Name the transformations and the order they occur to get g of x equals negative 3 times the absolute value of x minus 4 plus 7. Now, the rule of thumb, what I tell students in this case, tell you guys and all, that you want to approach this as far as looking at an order of operations problem. Okay? We can usually determine a type of transformation being performed on a function, but how we determine the order. So the good rule of thumb is using the order operations. In the order operations, we first have parentheses. So whatever we see in parentheses is, and we perform whatever operations in parentheses first. And so what comes down to is that, like, well, if there's something going in parentheses, no, that operation, that transformation being formed is what occurs first. Okay, so anything in parentheses, we would do first. Now, not just a number or a letter in parentheses, but the operation being done in parentheses. Now, as far as exponents, there's no exponents for these questions here, so we don't have to worry about that. But multiplication division, really multiplication, means that there will be some type of stretching or compression involved, whether in this case in our problems here, vertical stretching or vertical compression. And the number multiplying it will be, in this case, that factor of the vertical stretch compression now. However, we also see a negative multiplying, in this case, it usually means a reflection in the x-axis or y-axis. If our negative number is outside of the parentheses involving x, it usually means a reflection in the x-axis. If you have a negative multiplying the x, it usually means a reflection in the y-axis. And then finally, in order operations, we have the adding, subtracting at the very end. That usually means a shifting or translation done at the end. Most of the time, it's going to be some type of vertical shift in this case, whether it's vertical shift up or down. And so we want to, again, go through this and approach it from that point of view. So we take a look in this case and we see, well, is there a parenthesis? Well, the absolute value acts like a parenthesis here. So we see here x minus 4. So the very first thing we see here is going to be, when you have x minus 4, it's going to be a shift or translation. And because it's subtracting from the x, it's going to be a horizontal shift. So we have a horizontal shift. Because it's x minus 4, it actually is going to be not to the left by 4, but to the right by 4. We have x minus number in parentheses, usually be the opposite in this case. So x minus the number means a shift to the right by the number. So we have horizontal shift to the right by 4 units. If you saw x plus 4, it would mean a shift to the left by 4 units. So that's our first thing we're looking at. The next thing we're looking at is multiplication, and we see two things here. I mean, even though people see ones, we see two things. Negative 3. Now, negative 3 really means negative 1 times 3. And so in the order we see this, we're going to basically take a look at our negative 1 first, because we multiply from left to right. And so the second transformation in this case, we multiply by negative 1 is going to be a reflection in the x-axis. Again, it's a reflection in the x-axis if the negative 1's multiplying on the outside of parentheses here. Okay, and we go from left to right. We know a reflection in the x-axis, and whenever we multiply the whole function by negative 1, usually it's a reflection in the x-axis. So it looks like in this case, the very first thing we do is going to shift absolute value of x to the right by 4. Then we're going to reflect it over the x-axis. Now we deal with the 3 here. And this 3 is multiplying, so we're going to say in this case, when we're multiplying the function, this is especially on the outside of the absolute value, a vertical stretch. By a factor of 4. Sorry, my handwriting's terrible. And so, it's A actually. Yeah, I know, it's crazy. All right, so the key thing in this case is that when we have a number that's greater than absolute value number is greater than one, really 3 is greater than 1, it's a vertical stretch. If the number multiplying the function is between absolute value number is between 0 and 1, it's a vertical compression. Okay, vertical compression by that factor. So keep in mind. All right. And now finally, the last thing to look at is going to be this plus 7. And we said plus 7 usually going to be a vertical shift. Okay, up by 7 units. Now, I really want to be stressing this case. Some students are going to be like shortcutting and like, he knows what I'm talking about. You have to really, in this case, if you leave words out and say he'll fill it in for me, if you guys say, hey, Mr. Gong, you'll fill it in for me, right? And I'll fill in stuff for you, but I'll take my points as well too. You have to write everything out, please. Be very, very specific, and you want to write everything out, full sentences if you can, all right? Really, not just as brief. I know a lot of students like, I want to write as little as possible. When you do that, no, there's a strong possibility you're going to cut some points off because you were not clear enough. Some of you might say, for example, number 2, reflection. And that's it. Well, I can't give you full credit because is a reflection the x-axis or y-axis, right? And for number 3, you'll say a vertical change by a factor of 4. No, it's a vertical stretch. Okay, so you have to be very specific in this case. Also for your horizontal vertical shifts. And by what direction and by how many units, right? Well, let's look at question number 2. So if f of x equals square root of x, name the transformations in the order they occur to get g of x equals -7 times the parenthesis the square root of negative x minus 3. And again, we look at our parenthesis, all right? But within the parenthesis is another parenthesis here. We see this inside the square root is negative x here. And so we deal with that first right away. And here, when you see the x being multiplied by -1, this is going to mean a reflection in the y-axis. Whenever we replace x with negative x for all x's, that's a reflection in the y-axis. So that'll be the very first thing we do. If we were trying to build this from scratch, we would say, okay, we take square root of x and then make it, we're going to reflect over the y-axis by making square root of negative x. Then within that parenthesis, the next thing we see is going to be -3. And that's going to be, in this case, now, is that -3 subtracting from the x value? No. It is not. It is actually outside of the square root, because the square root acts as a parenthesis. No, we talked about how if a number is abstracting the x in the parenthesis, that's a horizontal shift. This one is not, though, because the -3 is not inside the square root radical symbol, and so here this is going to be a vertical shift. Vertical shift down by 3 units. Okay, so that'll be the next thing that occurs. All right. So then again, as we saw from before, we have a -7. Again, negative 7 is -1 times 7. So we take a look at the 7 first. Next one, -1 first. And so we see when we have a -1 multiplying the function on the outside, it's going to be a reflection in the x-axis. Okay. And then finally, the 7 will be a vertical stretch by a factor of 7. Okay. Now, I know some people say, well, what does it matter the order we do this in? And I'm going to go yes. All right. I'm going to go with yes, because of the fact that we're looking at it from this particular point of view. Now, some might say, well, I used my graphing calculator and I did this all, but when I change the function, and so that's not a specific function, and it's just f of x without anything else seen here, then you might have some issues because you won't be able to say, well, I looked at my graphing calculator. So we're going with this idea of using the order operations in this case, okay? All right, everybody? This is going to be the end of our MRS22 Spring 2021 Transformation of Functions Quiz number 1 Review Part 1. Okay, if you found this helpful, please give a like. If you have questions, please leave them in the comment section below. I appreciate any questions or comments you have in this case, everybody. And watch over again if you guys are not sure. But again, the concept is going to be read it as you would as you approach an order operations problem. Not that you're plugging a number in, but seeing what is being done from that perspective of inside the parentheses first and what work is being done here. So you have to be able to also identify what type of transformation is being done. Okay. All right, bye. I will see you in the next video. Take care and be safe.